Live.
Okay, good morning, everyone, again. The Senate Transportation Committee, we're trying to wrap up the bill and go through the final things that we've discussed for the last few weeks. And so we are going to start the discussion, and Anthea is with us and Chris, and so we'll continue our discussion. Thank you.
Okay, so what I will do is I'm sharing the screen now. This is with the editors, since I didn't know you were going to be taking it up. I will email it to you as soon as I get back from the editors, and I'll have via pink mail copies, hard copies delivered to all of you this afternoon. I just emailed them. So this is structured as a complete strike all amendment to the T-bill. Section 1. The only changes here are the removal of some of the definitions that you don't need, because all you are dealing with in this bill are level 3 chargers. All the language about the level 1s and level 2 chargers can move to the big bill. I took out the definition for level 1 charger and level 2 charger and just shifted everything accordingly. But there are no changes to the definitions or the balance of the section. Section 2, I am not going to go through now. This is still getting reviewed by the Agency of Transportation, but this is that summary section that the Senate has traditionally included, and I suggest just reading it when you have a hard copy. But nothing in this section is new. It is all just summarizing what's in the white book.
$1.5 million is out of there for
amendment. We just passed that amendment.
He doesn't want
We
to.
were hoping we were here for the vote, but didn't make it.
He got what he wanted.
Sorry.
He got what he wanted.
I didn't make sure my daughter was okay. There was a shooting in Brooklyn subway, not far from where she lives in Brooklyn. 36 people shot
Oh, no.
this morning during rush hour.
Oh, no. And casualties?
36 casualties.
Oh,
but
casualties,
no
not,
deaths so far.
Gee,
but I was wondering, no deaths, just,
I think in this country, just scary. Okay, go right ahead, Anthea.
well, no wonder you needed to check.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She's okay?
Yeah, she's good.
Was she there?
She was in bed. She goes, I don't get up that early.
Oh, good.
During rush hour.
All right, so this is just our inventory to make it obvious. Yeah.
And you can read it in
If
hard
Tim
copy.
Ash is listening, this is something that we started when he was on the committee.
Yeah, I know, I heard Tim the other day, he's got to find a full-time job here.
The one thing I will point out as we're going through is if there's language that's highlighted in blue, it's just to make sure that it links back up with the big bill. But one of the things that you have done with your proposals on the money is to take the $3 million away from going to A&R for charging stations at the state
In the
parks and
wilderness,
fishing
as we
accessories.
say.
The what?
In the
Oh,
wilderness.
Yeah.
Wilderness charging.
If there's a charging station in the wilderness, would anybody know?
I like that.
Oh, that's way too philosophical.
Well, you started it.
I did, okay. Oh my goodness. And we do have, we did modify that language a bit, that 10 million in ACCD to make it clear that.
That it would also be possible for state parks and access areas, probably already allowed under the community attraction venue language.
But we wanted to make sure.
Okay, so now you're getting to section 3. These are changes to the T-bill that you directed me to do. So the first one is for purposes of the structuring of the charging stations along the state highway network to make it a little bit more clear the paths that the agency could be taking to get there. And it could be for the agency itself to purchase and install level 3 EVSE, for the agency to provide grants to persons to purchase and install level 3 EVSE, or if the agency chooses to enter into public-private partnerships for the purchase and installation of the level 3 charging stations. And this is that $6.25 million, no change there, no change that I'm aware of in the funding sources. So it's $4.25, which is a combination of non-federal match T-fund dollars, and the NEVI, the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure money, which is through the IIJA, that 21 million you here talked about, and then 2 million coming from ARPA. So we have our purpose section, nothing's changed there. The administrative costs section has changed a little bit. It used to say administration expenses, I believe. Administrative costs is making it clear that they are the costs of administering the program, not necessarily just those of the agency. If the agency were to enter into a public-private partnership, some of the 15% go there. And then Senator Kitchell The language that you requested be changed, where it was originally 15% of the grant awards, now it's just 15% of the authorization of that 6.25 can go to these administrative costs. The other change you have here is there was originally, in the language that came over from the House for outreach and marketing, there was language that said in one place, if you spend money on translation and interpretation services, that's an administrative cost. And then there was other language that said, and you need to spend money on translation and interpretation. And it was very redundant and it was in two places.
Right.
So now it's just including it. So you don't see any reference to translation or interpretation in the administrative cost section. Instead, you just have it in the outreach and marketing section, and it says at the end, and such costs shall be considered administrative costs for purposes of subsection C of the section. So it's just in one place, and I hope that streamlines things a little bit. And
We hate gratuitous and duplicative and other kinds of language, so, no, I do. I'll just speak for myself, not the company.
I agree.
Oh, you agree? Take it out. All right.
okay, section 4, this is your EDSE goals language, and this is the one where it was included in the bill last year, where it was within 5 miles of an exit from the interstate and within 50 miles of another charging station along the state highway network. And there was a question that came up, and I had been confused about whether or not it was like you draw a circle around each exit or if it was point-to-point driving. So if I was confused, I figured maybe other people were confused, so I put in the word driving. So hopefully that's clarifying that it is a driving mile and not an as the crow flies mile.
And that's a goal, so it could be 30 miles or it can be 20 miles or something, because you are a spot.
Yeah.
Was one driving, is that the same as linear mile? I just want to make sure that,
Do you want to do linear mile instead?
Well, it'd be good to check, because these were changed by AOT so that we could get the national money, because they're requiring these distances.
They're requiring the 1 mile from the interstate, and
Number
it needs
2
to
is
be
ours.
included in the plan that they're going to present.
Right.
So even if this said driving mile and it turns out for purposes of the plan, they needed to change it, I don't think that it would be.
Plan could say what they need to say, even though the statute says.
Yeah, and my understanding is it's not like there needs to be from the legislature of every state, the establishment of these goals, but it's when the agencies of transportation, the departments of transportation need to develop a plan in order to be eligible for.
To get the funding.
Yeah.
And so basically you have to meet it. To get the funding for the station has to be within 1 mile of the exit.
I think
My understanding.
that is a requirement, and then there are also like priority networks that have been developed that the agency has been working on, so they have to like achieve having charging stations in certain corridors. And I think Michelle and Patrick Murphy can probably answer your questions more than that. And Michelle has seen this language. I will check with her the next time I see her to see if maybe it should be linear as opposed to driving.
Well, driving, I think, is better, because linear, you could still go.
Yeah, I
across
think
the
driving
field.
is better, because that's really what we're concerned about,
Yeah.
is
Road miles.
road miles.
I will make sure that Michelle is good with what it is, if it should be driving, road, or something else.
Michelle's working remotely, didn't we get an email?
Yeah, she said so she's probably listening.
Text her.
She'll get hold of her. She's probably sending us an email now.
If you're listening, Michelle, text Senator Chittenden.
If you see a little Outlook notification pop up at the top of the screen within the next minute, that might be Michelle. Okay, so for the in-vehicle incentive programs, no change to the dollar figures. I believe there's been no change to the funding source either. The changes that have originated from this committee were originally that public-private partnership with Drive Electric was included in the administrative costs language. Part of that was to try and make it be more part of the other programs if it was going to be paid for with ARPA, but since this is general fund, you now have your public-private partnership as its own subsection. Money has stayed the same. The for what purpose language has stayed the same. It's a continuation of the public-private partnership for the expansion of the PEV market in the state through the provision of stakeholder coordination, policy engagement, consumer education and outreach, infrastructure development and technical assistance. That has not changed. I know it's highlighted, but it's because it's in its own subsection. And then the administrative cost changes track the administrative cost changes we talked about earlier. It's 15% of the authorization. It doesn't say administration costs, it says administrative costs, and it's any cost associated with administering and promoting the program. And then you also do not have there the language about translation or interpretation services. That is once again an extra sentence at the end of the outreach and marketing saying, and such costs shall be considered administrative costs for purposes of subsection E of this section. So for purposes of the change to the program, that's the incentive program for new PEVs. This is where the language you got back from the House increased the MSRP for both the plug-in hybrid electric vehicles and the battery electric vehicles to be $45,000 or less. So it said manufactured PEVs with a base MSRP of $45,000 or less. That was what came over from the House. This is saying instead it's just the plug-in hybrid electric vehicles. So those are the ones that can still take gasoline, that the MSRP cap will stay at $40,000. And then if it's a manufactured battery electric BEV, then the MSRP increases to $45,000 or less. So that would cover more of your all electric vehicles. And then subdivision C, manufactured PEVs with any base MSRP that will be issued a special registration plate.
That was the one Andy reminded us, came over from the agency.
Yep. Or will be predominantly be used to provide accessible transportation for the incentive recipient or a member of the incentive recipient's household, provided that there will be either the incentive recipient or the member of the incentive recipient's household getting the windshield placard, because there are two ways that you can have your credential there, either the plate or the hang tag. And then that one would have no MSRP cap, and I believe there are a couple of vehicles that are more suitable for that.
Inspection stickers now are going way down the left-hand corner of your,
Have you seen any of them?
I did see.
my son does them every day, but I haven't seen one yet.
Yeah, I've seen them.
I haven't seen them, I haven't seen them.
People have been arguing for years that that was a better place to put them in front of the mirror.
Yeah, I forget.
I forget it, right, my.
Never see it.
All right, so
Yeah.
did this get the additional language about the equipment?
Yep.
Okay,
So this is your vast language. It's highlighted in blue because we need to make sure the section numbers line up with the big bill. What was originally included by House Transportation had the $1 million for the equipment grant and aid program and the $50,000 for law enforcement and safety program. House appropriations took that out. You are restoring the $50,000 for law enforcement and most of the equipment grant and aid, and adding in language that would require VAST to ensure that the equipment grant and aid program maximizes the geographic distribution and utilization of equipment purchased in whole or in part with the monies authorized in subdivision A2 by implementing grant scoring criteria that awards equipment grants to applicants that have worked with neighboring clubs to groom at least 60 miles of trails, and the equipment to be replaced is at least 15 years old. And Michelle has seen this language. It's slight tweaks to language that she proposed.
I like that.
we want to make sure that we're getting the maximum utilization.
Absolutely. They're not just use an upgrade. 'Cause they want
Or that it's, it might be perceived as just if one club gets it and the rest are, you know, haven't got access. So I think considering the appropriation in public funds here, that this.
Yeah, we ought to have a say in that, right? So I agree.
Representative Smith.
Easy, easy. This isn't done yet.
Go ahead.
Actually, I think this committee can take credit because we move the money around in a variety of ways. So
Yes.
Well, I hope we take credit.
We're gonna take a lot of credit.
It wouldn't happen without us.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so no changes to your bridge formula program. This is the one where there are certain bridges that are being funded at 100% for the construction phase. The only change that you're gonna see here is because the section numbers are shifting, there is a internal reference that has changed, and that's on page 19, line 9. But no change to the
Well, I'm
substance.
glad you picked that up because that's really been keeping me awake.
One thing about Anthea, everything is right there.
You do have to have a mind.
Yes, go ahead, Senator.
Are we closing sections out right now? or is
Yes,
that-
we are,
okay, So
yeah.
do we just close out?
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
good.
everything we've done so
Yeah,
far.
I'm
is
sorry,
closed out.
you have an issue
Okay.
pop up.
Much I want to get into it, but Senator Perchlik and I talked about one part of the bill that if they had a chance to go from level 2 to the higher level 3, that we'd like to kind of see them push to a level 3 charger versus level 2, because I think eventually we're gonna get there, but I haven't seen it in here, so I think we've already done it.
So the only language we'll see in this bill has to do with level 3 chargers along the state highway network. So
Okay.
that is only, the 6.25 million can only go to that. The level 1, 2s, and 3s for the $10 million pot of money, that language is in the big bill.
Okay, then we're good.
So you don't need to worry
Well-
about that, only I do. If you have language, you need to, that means,
It was the multifamily
yeah,
program where they can do level 1, which is a plug.
yeah.
And we said we'd rather than do level 2, just like as a priority, but I think they said that would likely be the priority, but there's some places where
Well, if
level
you
1
want
only.
to modify the language in the big bill compared to what the House said, you need to give me the suggested change.
Well, I'll leave that to Senator.
Okay, I don't think it's a big deal, but I'll look at it.
All right, well, if you feel it is worthy of modification.
Okay, Anthony.
It could be as simple as saying she'll prioritize.
Yeah,
Well, that's all I'm saying, but it's just a matter of keeping track of all these details.
JFO has been sent just a marked up section of E903. And now that you are closing out the administrative costs language, I'll make sure that that tracks over there. And Senator Perchlik and Senator Ingles, I will send that to you just so you can see what that section looks like. And if there's a simple way to just stick in and prioritize
Right.
level 2, I will maybe highlight that in a different color.
Well,
And we'll make sure that we get it over
yeah,
to
well,
JFO
Crystal
tonight.
and Stephanie, as well. Okay,
So should I say that you've closed out sections 1 to 3, section 4 for the driving miles, I'm checking with Michelle, and you've closed out 5, 6, 7, and 8?
mhm.
And then one thing to just remember with the bridges, I went over it a little quickly, because you are shifting to your 100% federal for the
We already
construction
spent
phase.
this 689.
I know, you already spent it, but this is
Well,
one
we
of
only
the,
spent 500,000, we left 189 for negotiating purposes.
okay. Program development, no change here. This is the freeing up of the $54,211 so that you can have your statutory amount for town highway aid match up, and that happens in the next section. This is the timing that the CPIU was calculated. It really
No,
was,
I understand. Was there gonna be language about carry forward to bring them up?
that's in one of the next sections. That
Oh,
has to do with
sorry.
structures and roadway.
Oh, okay.
So town highway aid is just the swapping of that
Yeah.
54,000.
Uh-huh.
Policy and planning, no change here. This is not freeing anything up, but the agency forgot to, or didn't yet know that they were going to be programming that $4.25 million for the NEVI money for the charging stations along the highway. So this is just adding in that $3,394,000 for the federal piece. No change in T-fund dollars. Town highway structures and town highway class roadway. This is the
No, that's the
one
language, yeah. absolutely.
where the House was cutting from the maintenance budget, the $866,500 for structures and the $951,000 for Class 2 roadway. My marching orders from this committee were to instead say it should come from the carry forward. So you'll see the exact same language for subsection A and B, but just make sure you're good with this.
And Michelle has seen this language.
Michelle has seen the language.
Well, she was the one who, suggested carry forward. As a way of doing it, so. So that will get us to where to meet those full percentages.
Good with this one. And then this one is exactly the same, except the program is different and it's $951,250.
And don't negotiate away that maintenance budget, whoever's on committee of conference.
If we have
Last year, you gave away everything
did?
with a house.
We did.
You
We didn't give away the meal.
What are you talking about?
No, this year, the 3 million that the house cut, they're gonna come in
Oh, and one
and we
cut.
restored it. I'm just saying, don't give it away.
Oh, listen to this.
Huh? Huh?
For the record, after going through this, He's got $1.6 million for public, for buses. You two got $850,000 for the trails. You got $1.6 million. You know what the chair got?
You got the pleasure of being with us. That's worth something.
You didn't even get your bike
I think that's right. You talk about a powerful chair.
I don't
This is it.
I don't mean to misspeak, but maybe you want to go after something that's attainable.
Maybe your aspirations are too high.
You talk about zero? Zero. That's
No,
it.
you got that bridge though.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
10 years ago.
Well,
They're still working on it.
That's still working on
It was
it.
such a big
And the
project.
the bronze plaque, the bronze has gone up, you know.
On the whole bridge again, which has been there for, 10 years we're working on it, yeah, right.
You know the old saying about the man who didn't expect much for Christmas and he didn't get as much as he expected. That might be
That's
you.
right, yeah, okay, just for the record, okay, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's
I'd like to get
move right along.
$5,000
Oh,
or something, you know, I mean, God.
Bus for Senator Moss.
Yeah, bronze, I mean, bronze has gone up. I find that thing's cast.
Uh-huh. All right.
Anybody want to be chair?
You don't get it.
I can't afford it.
Yeah.
No one wants to be chair and get nothing.
Go ahead.
I feel that way in appropriation.
I think you're doing well here, okay, go ahead, sure.
Yeah.
So section 14, no change here, but this is the $20,250,000 phase 2 IT project. And the governors recommend it was going to be transportation fund money. House appropriations made it ARPA. I think it is up in the air, or have you settled on a funding source for it? We'll just need to change the blue.
Well, I'll tell you appropriations is assuming that the House version moves forward. Because what the governor proposed was the JTAR transfer, and that creates a huge problem for the budget. So our assumption is we'll concur with the House as using the ARPA as the funding source for this IT project.
Can I ask a question about the IT
We
project?
may not. Yeah.
Is it everything that DMV does is affected by this IT project, or is it just like some part of their data?
Well, they already had one phase that we funded, so this is the second phase.
Yeah, wasn't it 54 million total or something like that? That was gonna be, or something. I remember that, seem to remember that number.
I just wonder if, we haven't talked about when I was gone, about the road weight posting. I just assumed that when they do this update, that
Module, you're talking about this program will accommodate that?
or just that it would be updated because it's super antiquated systems. We don't know.
I am sure that someone from the DMV knows what would be covered by this. It was not something that I think they took a lot of testimony.
There's one item I'm disappointed in, is that we did not pass anything, and it came from this bill for the veterans pension. I can't believe we're going another
We did a
year.
little-
Yeah, but the big thing is, we should have been able to do that. We've talked about it for 50 years, and I'm not a veteran, but I just thought that we could do it this year. 1 of 3 states that doesn't do it, and I can't believe we're gonna leave again.
But Andy said what did pass and was done is similar to what
There are
has been
some-
done in other states.
There are some states that just do the first $10,000 or things like that. So we
What would the total package would have cost?
I don't know.
All right, I know we can't do it in transportation, but if I could have, but yes, go ahead, sorry.
Okay, so I'll just keep it blue for the time being, and Chris will make sure it's right. Section 15, this is the Mobility and Transit Innovation, I always get this wrong. The Mobility and Transportation Innovation MTI Grant Program. We were increasing it to 1.5 when it came over from the House. It was just the 500,000. I know you talked about that this morning. And the funding source for the extra $1 million is the general fund. One thing I just want to make sure is that you are good with the implementation language. The program shall continue to support microtransit projects that improve both mobility and access to services for transit-dependent Vermonters, reduce the use of single occupancy vehicles, and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. I think that is broad in its scope, but it needs to be microtransit projects. And the original iteration of the Mobility and Transportation Innovation MTI Grant Program was not just microtransit. So with the influx of the additional 1 million, do you still want to limit it to microtransit?
I do.
Is that's the House language?
Yeah.
So all we're doing is agreeing with the House.
and increasing it.
Yeah, but I mean, the language, yeah.
And then some of the language, we talked about briefly when we did the walkthrough. I think some of this language is sort of gratuitous and that, you know, of course, there can be other funding sources for microtransit. So I think subsection D you don't necessarily need. And I also don't think you need to tell the agency that they may assist public transit providers with converting fixed route services.
Strike it. Just,
D and C you want out?
why not?
E.
Oh, D and E, yes.
D and E, right. If you just, and we'd love to tell them to do what they're already doing.
And also E is like super permissive. It used to say the agency shall assist public transit providers with converting it, but then there was testimony that like in some cases you don't want microtransit, you want to have fixed route service. So then the may changed to shall change to may.
Maybe something to give up if you
Right.
have to.
Why do you keep saying you? Why don't you think you're on the, you don't think you're in the favor of the chair to be appointed to the?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, so I will take out D and E because we're starting.
You're not supposed to say that while we're live, so now they know because the House watches on.
Well, they do watch, they do, yeah. Well, fight for it, guys.
That's the highest priority.
No, the maintenance, keeping the
No, we're
maintenance.
just saying that.
Oh, I see,
Where we're at.
I see.
Section 16 actually changed quite a bit from what the House sent you. So in the version of the language that came from the House, the reader assistance heading and the section heading, I think, was zero fare public transit in fiscal year 23. And you lowered the amount slightly. So it's now 1.2, I think it was 1.4 and change when it came over from the House. Changed the name of the project to increased one-time monies for public transit for fiscal year 2023. For your implementation purpose, it was in the language that came over the House. It said something along the lines of, she'll use this for zero fare public transit on everything except for the Link Express routes. This is now saying that the transit agencies shall, as practicable and in the sole discretion of the transit agencies, do the following during fiscal year 23. 1, operate routes other than commuter, that's an addition, and Link Express on a zero fare basis, and provide service at pre-COVID-19 levels. It's as practicable, it's in their discretion, it's a lower amount, and there's more flexibility in terms of it doesn't need to be just for zero fare.
So the shall is softened with the as practical.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
So that will
And in the sole discretion of.
allow commuter and Link to have the fare that you talked about. And number 2 deals with don't cut back service.
But still gives them flexibility if they need to cut service in their discretion.
Fight for that.
Yes. We will.
You fight for that. No, I think it was all part of our package.
Yeah.
Anything's free, I'm for.
Oh,
I think we ought to pay them to ride. I think we ought to give money.
I still don't,
Better hand over.
I still don't understand what the cost of gasoline, why the take-up hasn't been greater.
It's not convenient, you
But
gotta be
now,
convenient.
well, people also are saying many workers are remote now,
Yeah.
that's had an impact.
Plus, if the bus doesn't come at your convenience, it's pretty difficult to ride the bus. I mean, let's be honest about it. Everybody's job requires a different time of day and everything else, and it's tough to be the 7 o'clock in the morning, 8 o'clock, 9
Well, that's
o'clock.
why that micro proposal
Yes.
that they're talking about may have greater flexibility.
But the drawing to Montpelier or St. Albans, I mean,
That
that's,
makes sense, because
That
you got
makes
a
sense,
volume
yeah.
that.
that's why we're paying them to ride, we don't charge them for that. So,
Well, Rob, I rode for free, remember?
yeah, that's right.
Let's move right along. Let's not open old wounds.
Speaking of old wounds, let's talk about the airport.
Oh, wait, no, we're not there yet. I scrolled too much. Senator Pitchell, the language in the report requirement that you kept in said estimates the amount of funding needed to continue to provide, and this just says to provide because you're not continuing something that you're telling them to stop doing, and it doesn't presuppose the fact that there will be a continuation of it. Airport, nothing has changed. It's all highlighted just because it's new to the T-bill, but nothing has changed from the language that you looked at last week. And it has as the funding source, 150,000 from the 500,000 that would have been going for the non-federal match for projects at the airport. And then it has all the changes that you went through last week about the membership, the addition of the 2 non-voting members, the language that comes from the environmental justice bill for the appointment or the designation from the Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission. And then the timing has changed a little bit in terms of the first meeting not being until September. And then you've got your process where there's going to be the RFI that the agency does. They've got the neutral facilitator and then the RFP. And then you will be getting your report back in January 15th of 2024. And then it ceases to exist on January 16th of 2024.
You wanna add that? How many times have we brought that? I was right up there with bicycle safety. Front plates.
Banned those for years, you don't think.
We even took-
Save a lot of
We
money.
even assumed savings one year.
Yeah, there's web savings from a plate.
Yeah.
We start looking at some pole by plate technologies that could be useful.
I like that.
Do you like them?
Yeah.
Really?
I think we could examine classic cars. Old cars, though.
Maybe classic drivers.
Oh,
Not that anybody in this room would qualify for that.
You know, it's amazing, I watch now, I go through parking lots and the stickers on cars, they're behind 2-3 years. You look at, people don't even put their stickers on the rear plate.
Yeah.
The other day I walked through a parking lot and I caught 3 cars that were expired last year. But they're not even putting the stickers on the plate.
Well-
The officers not stopping because it's worthless to try to, pick it all out.
Or leaving a paper plate.
Have the plates so many years that we're getting kind of a
Yeah,
thick,
yeah,
layer of
yeah.
sticker on top of sticker. Each time I wonder how long it's gonna last.
The front plate is worthless, but anyway. Go ahead.
Okay, so you good with your
Yeah,
different
we're
language?
good. We're
Have you
digressing.
asked it before in the house, didn't agree?
No one ever put it in.
Oh, the house didn't like it either. Did they? Oh, we got it through one year. Then the DMV came back and said they couldn't save very much money.
I thought it was over,
We thought it was like 120,000.
yeah, it was, is it like 120,000?
100,000.
Yeah. Nothing worth laughing at. So. Okay, Anthea, we're sorry. We have-
Carbon reduction.
So this is the language that says that the agency shall include in its proposed transportation program for fiscal year 24 that all of the federal monies that are available to the state under the carbon reduction program in fiscal years 22, 23, and 24 will be allocated towards projects that align with the recommendations of the CAP. And you talked about this quite a bit. You heard from Michelle saying, well, this is how I would do it. You also have the fact that it's just the proposed transportation program and you should change it. But you were requiring them to, in essence, prioritize using the carbon reduction program money that you don't know how it can be used for yet in the white book that is going to come back to you next year. And that means that potentially with your the drain on the transportation fund for non-federal match, if money is being used to match the carbon reduction program, it's money that is not going to be available to match some other federal source of funding. So I don't know if you want to keep this. It's there right now.
I thought, well, I don't know, it seems like you're suggesting that we're finding the money as opposed to if you're using that money in that way, it has to align with the
This is
climate
federal
action
money.
plan.
So the carbon reduction program money is federal. What you're going to end up getting is a white book that needs to meet these requirements.
Right.
And the white book, I mean, you change it
Not
a
the whole
little.
white book, but just the carbon reduction federal money.
But if there is going to be, let's say you only have the non-federal match to do like 7 of the things that the agency wants to do, and you're having all the carbon reduction program sort of go to the top of the heap when they're
It
needing
may
to
not be the
program
top
it.
priorities, which
It may not be their top priorities. I know Michelle has said, they could create some sort of grant program and have municipalities assume the non-federal match piece. We don't necessarily know if that's something that's going to be possible under the programmatic guidelines for the carbon reduction program.
Because it just says that they be allocated toward projects that align, let's say.
that's my question. Well, maybe we should write it in such a way that it doesn't create a funding straitjacket, but communicates that, in other places, we've got whenever practicable, to condition it, that it's not, that there's some flexibility there. If, because it could very well mean that you're funding projects, putting them ahead when they're not, in the scheme of things, might not be the highest priority for reasons that we can't really anticipate.
Yeah. And I mean, the way that you build your T-bill is you take the white book and then it's only changed to the extent that you changed it and that there's the available federal, local, and state funding. So you're putting the agency in a position where maybe their proposal is not actually what their proposal would have been, and you might have to do more undoing than you would otherwise have to do if you weren't telling them this first draft of the white book should
So
say
what, as
XYZ.
practical,
My guess is that the carbon reduction program, federal requirements, it'd probably be pretty easy for them to draw a line to the recommendations of the climate action plan. Could you give an example of what would?
But it's not, I think that the issue that you might not have, and Senator Kitchell, you said this, well, of course we would want the recommendations to align with the climate action plan. It's the fact that they need to, in this proposed transportation program, use all of the federal monies that are available to the state under the carbon reduction program in federal fiscal years 22, 23, and 24. You could say any of the, I'm not going to put this in very clear, eloquent language, but if you were going to make a recommendation on, or if you're going to include the drawdown of the carbon reduction program monies in the proposed transportation program, it needs to align with the cap. Not telling you you need to use all of the carbon reduction money, program money that's available. You don't need to include all of it in the white book. But if you're going to tell us that you want to spend the carbon reduction program money and you want us to approve it as part of the transportation program, it needs to align with the cap. You could say a smaller amount. You could say you could say it needs to align as the cap, and as practicable, you shall use all of the money that's available under the carbon reduction program.
But we don't know that it would align. It could align.
I think you are probably not going to have problems having the carbon reduction program align with the cap. I think what you might have problems doing is when you are looking to see what your non-federal match is available, using all of the federal money that you have coming to the state. And that's something that I know Chris has talked about. It's something that always comes up when you're talking about, like, if the gas taxes, dwindling, if we are having fewer people buy new cars, and oh wait, the fees haven't been increased in a number of years, there's going to be this big hole that needs to be filled. And I know you've heard from the agency and from Chris that we might be in a situation where we can't use all of the federal money.
So is the word in question here, shall? Is that the only word that we're?
well, I think it would be part of it, but I also think recognizing that because there's some unknowns here, we're actually putting constraints that with the benefit of experience could be problematic. So we could give ourselves a little bit more flexibility, but still express, the intent to have alignment. But the issue around the health of our T fund and availability, I think, is something that's
Chris,
gotta
you had a
keep in
comment?
mind.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. If I'm following along the conversation, if I may perhaps make a suggestion that on line 6 and 7, instead of saying that are available to the state, would that are proposed to be expended by the state resolve the concerns?
Right, and you could do that. I just wondered if allocated, can you allocate it towards a project and then not do the state match so that they don't get funded, or is that?
Or you could perhaps pass the non-federal match on to a local recipient if you structure it that way.
Yeah, because what Chris is suggesting saying is like they would do the white book on their priorities, and then those programs that they put in the white book need to match the CAP.
Yeah, and I also think that there's a very, and Thea raised this, I think it's a very credible and real concern that the agency may not be in a position to spend 3 federal fiscal years worth of money in 1 year's white book. So if their plan, just due to the natural course of project timing and everything else and cash flow for the non-federal match requires more flexibility, then perhaps if you don't say all the money that's available, but all the money that is proposed to be expended from those fiscal years would align, then you might be able to achieve your goal.
And you also could, and obviously this could be not withstood next year, you could have it be.
Yeah, we love that, but
You could tee it up where, yes, it's spanning multiple federal years. It might not be possible to do it in one pot, but you could say, in the Agency of Transportation's proposed fiscal year 24, 25, and 26 transportation programs, it needs to align with the cap. Do you want me to work with Chris on some language and we can see it tomorrow? I think it might be easier
you're
to see.
identifying something, sometimes.
You and Chris work it out. I always hate
It's
when
like
you
the
see the word
PCD
shall.
testing that we're getting hit with, that language that got stuck in at the end and.
So it's always tough sometimes when you see the word shall, when you're trying to get to the same goal, but
And
things,
it's also all federal monies that are available. That's a very,
right,
that's a very
confined.
limiting, yeah, limiting.
Under the
statement.
carbon reduction.
Yeah.
I understand that, but it says all of them that are available under that funding source, so.
Do you remember how much it is over the?
It's around $30 million over 5 years, so it's not
Huge amount.
well, and it's not an inconsequential amount, especially if you're looking at rolling 3 years of that into one sort of like 1 year. So it might,
The state match was, do we know what it is gonna
well, we
be?
don't have any guidance yet, which is a big problem here, but we're operating under the assumption that it would be your typical 80-20.
But I mean, it could be that it's done 80-10-10, it
Right.
could be that Michelle's grant program idea is a viable option.
I think,
I'm okay.
I think your offer to go and just rework some language and not our attempt to do it in committee.
Yeah,
So
go ahead.
probably is the
Do that.
best thing.
Go ahead.
Yep.
All right. Uh-huh.
So now you've got new language, Senator Persilik mentioned this last week. It's telling the Agency of Transportation to develop a plan for how they're going to go about updating the Vermont state standards for the design of transportation, construction, reconstruction, and rehabilitation on freeways, roads, and streets. The actual name of the current standards, but we'll just call them Vermont state standards for the rest of this. I included the Code of Vermont Rules number there because interestingly, when these were adopted, and John,
time ago.
a long time ago, it was determined by the General Assembly that the agency needed to go through rulemaking under the Administrative Procedure Act, which means that these rules continue to exist. The agency can't just sort of say, like, we're done with them now, we have new rules, even if they go and they go through a public process period, provided that it's not the APA piece, those rules will continue to exist. So one of the things I think you will see in the next T-bill is language that the agency will propose to repeal these standards in conjunction with them adopting the new standards through their plan to adopt them. What this committee will probably need to grapple with a year from now is you're going to get this plan back from the agency, and there may be less public outreach required that the agency is requiring of itself than would necessarily be in play under the rulemaking process through the Administrative Procedure Act. I think the agency probably would be choosing to engage with the public. So it's just something to think about when you are having these be adopted in a way that deviates from the APA. But that's something for the future use to think about.
And you know this because Michelle was okay with this language, but she mentioned like, oh, now that we know that they're rules, we'd rather not actually go through the rule process. We want to say, this is the new plan and we're not going to go through rules. We're going to make it just this.
I think that's the direction they're going in. Another thing to just remember, the rulemaking process is not great for making changes because under the statutory requirements, it takes on the
Long time.
really fast end, like 4 to 6 months, and on the long end, like more than a year to adopt rules. So if you want to have something that maybe is able to keep pace with the change in industry standards a little bit more, rulemaking is maybe not the best way about going about that. I haven't heard anyone saying that the reason why the standards haven't been adopted is because they don't want to go through rulemaking again. But I think that is a valid argument to say, you know, it's a pain to change them, so we're not
So
going
the
to.
standards are also in statute along with that language?
No, it was session law that said you need to adopt standards through rulemaking.
Okay, so that, but if rulemaking, those rules have the force of law, but if you're already doing the standards, are they proposing to put the standards into statute then?
I think they are proposing to have the standards just be adopted as they adopt their other standards for things. So it wouldn't be in statute, it wouldn't be in rule. Maybe that's something this committee cares about a year from now when you get their plan, and maybe you want some of it to be in statute, or you do want it to continue to be in rules.
I think I think probably we do need to have discussion about that.
Yeah, nice.
Because,
Whoever's here.
yeah, whoever's here, right?
And then, so you're telling them in subsection A that they need to develop a plan. In subsection B, they also need to prepare a plan to update document standards, guidance, and procedures related to the state standards that came from the report that was done last about how they
Is this
should
the
be updated.
agency language here then?
I wrote this language and I think Michelle is fine with it. Subsection C, the agency needs to budget for the plan in the proposed fiscal year 2024 transportation program. I think Michelle said there would definitely be a cost to it. And then the agency needs to make staff available to the House and Senate Committees on Transportation for an oral presentation, not a written report, on the plan at some point after January 15th of 2023. So they need to develop the plan, they need to budget for it in the transportation program, and they need to make themselves available to tell you about their plan. And that can be when you have conversations
What their
about
plan is for the plan?
what their plan is for the plan. And that can be when you say, well, we don't like your plan, we don't like your plan, we think you need to,
Come back with another plan.
or we're gonna tell you that your plan is deficient because it didn't include
Revisions and revisions.
for public hearings or whatever you think they need to do. And then part of the plan is presumably going to be, and upon the adoption of these new standards, the repeal of the statute, the session law that required them to go through rulemaking.
So
That's it through section 19.
how many more do we have to go?
I think this bill is at like 60 sections now,
Wow.
but in terms of pages,
Oh,
you
no.
made it through more than half, almost half the bill. You're at page 34 of
Well,
70.
a lot of it isn't changes, so we can,
What's your wish, John? Continue tomorrow, wrap it up.
yeah. Well, are we at a good place to break?
Yeah, I think you're at a great place to break.
Okay,
And what I'm gonna do is then as soon as I get it back from the editors, I will send it to you. I will work with Chris on a revision to section 18. I'll check with Michelle on the driving mile. I will delete subsections D and E for the language about you can't use other, or you can use other
You
funding
may
sources and the conversion. I will also have copies printed out of the edited version, and I'll try and get them to you through pink mail, so you'll have them for tomorrow morning. And then I believe Jeannie has scheduled me for all of tomorrow morning. I don't think you have any.
yes, I think we have everything, open tomorrow to finish up. Yep.
Yeah, it'd be nice to.
Yeah, yes, go ahead.
On the road posting, Mike Smith did email me today. He said that we could just get rid of that February 10th date. That's not needed because it just, the towns need to post it to the website within 3 business days of them posting the actual signs if enforcement's gonna happen.
Yeah.
And the statute further states that updates can be made from time to time. That said, we believe the date can be removed entirely.
I didn't see anything that I thought would prohibit that. I just think they could maybe go in further and not require them to publish it by
Does that
April 1st.
require, a change in statute?
Yeah, it would just be
Date in
striking out a
statute?
date, yeah.
Yeah, I think other changes could be made, but maybe for now we'll strike the date and then
So that's gonna be
Next year.
something we need to add.
Just remember, don't put your political signs all over this year, because there's a law, they're gonna pick them up and throw them away.
That's why I bought 1,000, because I can't get them all.
I don't wanna see any of them on a highway right away.
A
I'm gonna put
thousand,
them up in Colchester.
No highway right away, that's it. You go to ask the person or your property, that's it.
that's what I tell people, it drives me crazy when
They're
when you're
spend
all the money on
signs. It don't make any sense.
signs don't vote.
Signs don't vote, no, it clutters the highways.
And people leaving there.
And they leave them there, they fall over in the wind, they blow away. You bought some?
I still have, I bought 1,000 2 years ago, and I have 640 back. They're going out again, sorry.
So you put them in the public right away.
I do.
So that's the comment up there.
So
You're
I
a council
told
person.
we can 2 weeks prior to the election.
Not in the right of way.
Not in the right of way, no, no. We
I
passed
think,
that
I think,
law.
I think that AOT doesn't enforce it as much as it gets
Next
closer.
one this year, I'm gonna make sure they.
I try to make them look good. I'm out there.
They don't look good.
Are you putting them like an island?
Just a picture of it, what's it look good?
That looks like that, that's
Look
it.
at that.
Sorry.
If that comes out tomorrow with another picture, I'm gonna ban the 7 days of my store.
It's 4 weeks running. I wonder how long we're gonna go with it.
Yeah, God.
I'm gonna send you this, fancy it just so you have it.
Great, thanks.
I had
Okay, you can take us off live, Jeannie.
Look, I've got a barn full myself, but now with a smaller district. So we're off live. So,